Welcome back to our weekly Bhagavad Gita and yoga philosophy studies. Thank you all for joining us. Whether you're here live or you are watching this recording later, we're honored to have you. Thank you so much for your presence. We,
Haribo.
Marble, we are going to be, myself and Jagai and Asriel and Rebecca. We're just going to start where we left off, chapter 3, around verse 25. But before we do that, we'll open with our invocations and then we'll just dive into the text. So if you're new, you're watching this later, we are reading from the Bhagavad Gita and we are in chapter 3. We're going to start at verse 25. So if you have a Gita, you can grab it. If you don't, you're also, you can just listen and follow along as well. Okay, Jagai, would you like to lead our invocations?
Sure. Om Jnana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadam Hayam Dadati Svaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabhadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Brisabhanu Stute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sendubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinam Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Sometimes people ask, do we say that when we read Bhagavad Gita? Because it's not Bhagavatam, it's not the Vedas. Why would we make a prayer, even though it's Vasudev? Okay, let's get that one down. Vasudev is not Vyasadev, but we still say it because it sounds similar. But why would we make a prayer honoring Srila Vyasadev when we read Bhagavad Gita? Dharma.
Vyasadeva is said to be the compiler of many of these texts that we have, which can be confusing for people because these texts have happened all during different periodical times, but yet this one person is responsible for writing them all down. But Vyasadeva is the human form in which this information has come through and been put on paper for us to have.
Yeah. And specifically,
The
Bhagavad Gita is in the Mahabharata, and Mahabharata was specifically compiled by Srila Vyasadeva. I mean, they all were, but that's that.
The core text that is emphasized from all the texts that he's written. It's like a connoisseur of these sort of philosophies, and so as a connoisseur, he's written a lot of these. Well, he's written down historical context, which holds these philosophies in different ways, and there are certain texts that are like the core essence of what many of them are trying to cross and reach over the span of the literature.
That's right. And it originally, when it was through oral reception, it was one bulk of verses and stories. Vedas were one. And Vyasadeva put them into compartmentalized text. And so the word Vyasa means to split, like to split. It's because he split the Vedas into different compartments. Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's start. Chapter 3, text 25. Do you want to start, Ashriel? Read a couple? Do you want me to? You want me to? Okay. Chapter 3, text 25. The translation is, as the ignorant perform their duties with attachment to results, similarly, the learned may also act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. How's that sound, Ashriel? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, last time we shared that this is specifically for the people who need it or who are still attached. So for example, I think you used the example of Radnaswamy, him, doing specific duties so that others will lead and observe what to do and then follow, not specifically because he needs it, but because others need it.
Exactly. Good. Good. And then 326 says, let not the wise disrupt the minds of the ignorant who are attached to fruit of action. They should not be encouraged to refrain from work, but to engage in work in the spirit of devotion. What does that mean, Rebecca? You're on mute.
Did you ask me, Jagai? Was that for me?
Yeah, were you listening?
Yeah.
626.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read it again. Let not the wise disrupt the minds of the ignorant who are attached to fruit of action. They should not be encouraged to refrain from work, but to engage in work in the spirit of devotion.
So pretty much someone who is working in the mode of ignorance is attached to the results. Therefore, they're still acting in karma, in a sense.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're acting from a place of devotion, from a place of bhakti and surrender, therefore you're engaging and transcending even the senses and engaging in Krishna consciousness, which therefore takes you out of the attachments to karma. So you get out of this cycle of karma.
Nice.
That's a good
Is that correct?
explanation. This verse is specifically saying, though, that people who are, as you described, in the material world and material pursuits, that we shouldn't just go and tell them, like, hey, you're doing it all wrong and you are not being spiritual and you need to give all this stuff up and just be spiritual. It's saying to, like, let them be where they are and not to deprive them. Ayurveda is really big on this philosophy too. In Ayurveda, it's not about deprivation. Some paths and ways of methodologies of healing can be really extreme in its deprivation, and that just causes resistance and rebellion when you try to deprive somebody of something that they're attached to. And so instead, meeting them where they're at and adding bits of spirituality into their lives and getting them to just shift their focus a little bit, but still letting them be where they're at. So it's not conducive if we just go up to people and basically like proselytize them and tell them, like, you need to be saved. It's not conducive. It doesn't, Krishna is telling us basically, like, meet them where they're at, love them for who they are, and just be that little bit of addition of spirituality in their life simply by being who you are, being present in their life, but not like judging them or condemning them or dismissing them and all the things that we tend to do when we think people are beneath us spiritually, or that they're some of my least favorite sort of terms get thrown around in some bhakti communities when they're Mayavadis. right? Or they're just into boga, like they're just, they're like, there's these terms that they'll use that are, it's very condescending and othering.
There's karmis.
The karmis, that's another one. I can't hang out with those karmis, or oh, that's too many karmis there. They're all going to be eating meat, those Mayavadis. And maybe I don't like it because those terms have been used against me. But I just feel like it's so divisive and so othering, and it isn't conducive to anyone's spirituality. And so I really love this part of chapter 3 where Krishna is really talking about what we call in the personal development industry servant leadership.
It sounds like you're saying, Dharma, that this practice, you can be a hunter, a prostitute, whatever, and still make advancement. Is that true?
You don't have to just like make a full pivot and just renounce everything. That it's a slow addition of spirituality in your life. Like take whatever you're doing and find a way to spiritualize it. And that in and of itself, even if you do it a little bit, will begin the natural process of advancing in your spiritual life, because you start to tip the scale in the other direction where now you get momentum towards spiritualizing what you're doing, rather than the momentum of materializing everything that we're doing. But it doesn't, you can be wherever you are in the world, and we shouldn't, my takeaway from this is that it's not our place to go tell somebody, hey, you're a hunter, so you must not be spiritual. You still eat meat, so you must not be spiritual. And I used to have that belief. I used to think that. Like, how can somebody really claim being spiritual and eat meat? It just, because that was my value. But then you find out people that you really respect, like the Dalai Lama, eats meat. And so who am I to say that he's not spiritual just because he eats meat? And so for me, that's my biggest takeaway from this verse is, not judging what other people are doing and pointing out how they're doing it wrong, but rather adding more spirituality into the circle of whatever you're doing, just simply by your presence and your example, not by your words of beratement, so to speak. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Very well said. I just want to break down the Sanskrit of this next one, a little bit of technicality, and then if somebody can read it and keep going. But in the 327, this verse says prakrite. So up to this point, Krishna said, the wise, they don't disrupt the minds of the so-called ignorant and do their duties, and they help engage them. And then he gets technical on this verse and he says, prakrite kriyamanani. So what is prakriti? Do you remember what prakriti is?
Nature. Or like material nature.
So this is a pretty easy verse to break down. Prakriti kriyamanani. Kriyas means like,
well, it can mean many things, like a purification or an action of purification.
Yeah, or work or karma, right? To work. So prakriti kriyamanani. Prakriti is doing everything, doing the work. So material nature is doing the work. So why disrupt the minds of those when material nature is it's like impelling them to move, right? We don't know. You don't understand my nature. I don't understand your nature. You and I are different. Material nature is impelling me maybe more in the mode of passion than Rebecca, but either way, material nature is moving it. Then the second line, gunai karmani sarvasaha. Everything is being done by the gunas. We're like puppets. Like if you ever see the claymation movies, ever seen a claymation movie, right? The person's doing something, then they film the person doing the claymation movie. It's like hands moving and the thing moves, right? So prakriti is like that with us. We think we're moving our hands and beating our heart, but it's prakriti doing everything. Then Krishna says something really amazing here. He says, ahankara, which means
ego, or I am the doer, I'm doing.
Vimud atma. It is the foolish person with ahankara, false ego, who thinks ite manyate kartaham. I'm the doer. I
think maybe it's just what I'm going through right now in my personal life, but I'm just seeing this verse a little bit differently right now and than I've ever before. We would assume that that statement is meant towards the people who are the karmis, but I think that it's really meant towards the spiritualists. We think we're the doer. We're going to go make somebody spiritual. We're going to go get them to be self-realized. And we think we're the doer. That's a foolish person to think we can change somebody else's unique timeline and their own unique path that they're walking. Like, that's pretty foolish.
Smart. Yeah, I didn't see that perspective, because the verse before, Krishna is saying the wise don't disrupt the minds of the so-called ignorant. So this could be, as you're saying, a verse for the spiritualist.
Yeah.
Nicely said.
I think that this is something that causes a lot of division in our society is, this idea that, it's our duty to save the lost souls, whether we're Christian, whether we're Hare Krishnas. This whole idea and notion of like, we got to go out and save people and tell them that what they're doing is not spiritual. It causes so much more harm than any good. And yet you see so many people being driven from that standpoint, from a good place sometimes, to help others. And I'm every time we go over chapter 3, I always remember how much I love this part of this chapter, because it really has a heavy emphasis on being a role model.
Yeah.
Being a role model. And that doesn't mean that's do as I do, not do as I say.
Yeah.
Right. And it isn't even do as I do. It's like, I'm just gonna do. And people who are at the right time on their own journey, who have the eyes to see, will see, and they will choose.
Yeah.
And those that don't, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's not even, that's okay. That's the natural path of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, look at our little group is kind of like, you can take a little bit of rice from a big pot and you can test the whole pot, right? So our little group, we have people from all spectrums, right? We have like Rebecca, who came to it and said, I'm throwing in Hare Krishna. I'm gonna wear tilak and go to Mangalarti. To those who, they come for kirtan and maybe they think half the stuff we say is nonsense, whatever, but there's a spectrum there. And our job, as you're saying very clearly, not even our job, it's not a job, it's a service that we get to accept with all respect and gratitude, is to offer those things that are coming down through Krishna as like an instrument. Somebody takes it or not, that's not up to me or you or anybody,
Yeah, and again, I'll just emphasize that offering you speak of is done from a place of, again, just role modeling and living by example, like Gandhi said, right? Being the change that you wish to see in the world. Like, that's when you do that, regardless of what others are doing, it does have an impact, even though it feels like you're all alone out in the ocean of samsara. But role modeling is one of the most powerful ways of influencing people. And I don't mean influencing in I'm using my mind tricks on you and manipulating you to influence you, which is what I think most of us associate with that word influence or persuasion. But there have been people in your lives who have influenced you profoundly. And probably those people never told you who you have to be in order to be a good person or be a good spiritualist. There are probably people who you think, wow, they're really walking the walk. And I'm inspired by their life and what they're doing and who they are in the midst of all of that. And I think it's such a superpower that it's underrated. It's like people don't realize. I get a lot of students who will ask me, like, how do I get my husband, most often that's the question, my husband or my wife, to come to yoga with me? And I say, stop asking them to come to yoga with you. That's my answer. Stop asking them to come with you. Just keep doing your yoga, keep being you, keep getting happier and happier and healthier and healthier. And you do your thing. And every now and then you can try to include them by just offering, would you like to come? Great. But don't, like, you got to let go. The more you try to make somebody something, right, the more you're going to get that pushback, because it implies that who they are is wrong and not okay. And we all know what that feels like.
To add to what you're saying is so true, especially in context to Krishna's speaking, because if there was one solid path that that's what you've got to do, or you go to the hellish planets or whatever, then Krishna would have said so. But what happens here, as we see, as we move forward, even in this chapter, Arjuna asks Krishna, why have you given me equivocal instructions, many different instructions? And through the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will go through different kinds of yoga, and different modes of material nature, different types of worship, different kinds of things. Eventually, he says, just simply surrender unto me. But if all those things had no value, he wouldn't have said them, right? So there are different paths and people. Yes, Ashriel, who's patiently waiting with her hand up.
I feel like to add to what you're sharing, Dharma, I feel like that's kind of what the essence of karma is too, is like walking the walk, leading by example without really having any expectations. So like in the example of, how do I get my husband to come or whatever? It's like how you're having this expectation and placing your expectations onto a person. And that's kind of essentially what karma is trying to like veer away from, anything that's not, doing something as an offering to Krishna. And I feel like, I'm obviously very guilty of having expectations in my life and the world, of course, and hoping that my actions bring fruit of, results. But that's what I got out of what you shared, is, allowing those things to just be.
Well, I think it's normal and human for us to have expectations. Evaluating our expectations to see if they're like reasonable or unreasonable, that's a practice in and of itself. But the way that we approach the situation with that expectation, like I can hold an expectation and also know that even though I expect that, I can't make that person be a certain way. And so it's easier when it's people on the outer circle of your life. It gets a little trickier and stickier when it's dealing with people who are in close, intimate relationships. It's harder, and it definitely harder in a sense that you have to have more patience, and it just takes longer,
Mm-hmm.
I get asked often too from other teachers that are Hare Krishna devotees, friends of mine, like, how do you get so many people to chant Maha Mantra? And how do you get so many of your students to be vegetarian? Because that's typically what happens throughout the course of the teacher training. And my response is always the same. I don't try to make them do that. There's no pressure on them to be a certain way, to pick a particular mantra. There's no favoritism in my leanings and my teachings of like, this is the best mantra and this is the one that you should chant. I allow them to be themselves as I live my life and share my practice. They do what they want with it. And so I find that people are inspired by that. It touches their heart in some way that they want to change from the inside. When we get into like personal relationships, that gets a whole lot messier and harder, to do that, especially, intimate romantic relationships. It's harder. So I'm still working that one out myself. All right, shall we move on
Yeah.
to the next
Who
verse?
wants to read next? Dharma?
Yeah, are we
28?
28? Okay. One who is in knowledge of the absolute truth, almighty armed, does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification, knowing well the differences between work and devotion and work for fruitive results.
Okay.
29.
Was that weird? Okay, don't just go over
No,
it.
it's not weird. It's just hard. It's like, okay, like it's hard, like I don't know what he means by does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification, because I think at first glance or the surface glance is like, don't engage your senses, don't enjoy, don't have any sense gratification, just deprive yourself of those things. But then he follows up with the sentence of knowing well the differences between work and devotion and work for fruitive results. So I just, it's on surface, it seems difficult, but I think for me, what my understanding is when we do the works in devotion, there inevitably is sense gratification that comes from that still that we get to partake in, but we're not expecting it or having attachment to it or think that we're owed it or something. And I think that's like people I think take this the wrong way of like, just don't engage your senses. But when you do them in a mode of service, like you have to engage your senses if you're going to be doing work in the mode of service. You're using your senses. There's going to be sense gratification. It's just we don't go into it thinking that's what I'm doing it for. Although, this is the conundrum of that verse, is there's still that like, well, I gotta pay my bills, so I am expecting to make this much money. I do need to make this money. I do want to do it in service. And so, I don't know, I think that these kind of things get us a little tangled up in a way where we don't really know what to do and how to act and behave. So any words of wisdom, Jagai, would be greatly appreciated.
Well, so one thing that I've noticed is that for us, let's say regular old followers of Bhakti yoga, no matter what level you're on, sometimes we're a little bit in a different mentality than Prabhupada's translation in the Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita is meant for the person on the sidewalk. And so we are taking up a different place. And then we read these verses and kind of read into it. So let's just go through the Sanskrit and see what it says, like as a translation, and see if it makes more sense. And I think it will. So the first thing is tattvavit, means the person who knows the truth. Okay. You just know the truth. You've studied. Krishna's given you revelation in the heart. You have a perspective. Okay. Guna karma vibhagayo. As opposed to one who works under the modes of nature, a person who's working in the modes. So let's think of that difference. A person who's working in knowledge or a person who's working in ignorance. What could be a good analogy? Like I'll give an analogy. Imagine if you went to the movies and you thought the movies were real, right? So as you're watching it, you think it's real. You'd be totally disturbed, right? You'd be crying and stressing and you think you're watching this thing, it's real. But when you know that it's not real, you have the knowledge, you have the tattvavit, then though you're still watching the movie, your outcome is different. Does that make sense?
I like that analogy, and I watch movies and I know they're not real, and
Yeah.
I still have feelings about them. I'm still engaged in it. I'm still like crying or laughing or scared, but I know it's not real. So
Yeah.
I'm not putting and society does that too. It's like, oh, why are you crying? It's just a movie. Like there's that human aspect of us of relating and connecting and learning through story. And so we are going to be engaged in that way. But because I know it's not real, it isn't as big as it would be or could be if I was like, oh my God, that's really happening.
Right? Like maybe a
Yeah.
child who has a toy and the toy broke or got lost. Why are you as an adult not as disturbed as the child? You may be disturbed. That kid took my kid's toy and smashed it. You're upset. But why are you not as upset as the child?
Because my awareness of the temporariness and
The replaceability of it, the value of it, you just have a different perspective.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's basically all this is saying, is that one who knows that has knowledge of the absolute truth does not engage himself in the senses in sense gratification. Means there's no way to not use your senses. That means you're dead. So, but you're not completely steeped in that as the only result of your work. That's it. That's all there is to your actions, is that result. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah. And that's it. Knowing well the differences in work and devotion and the work for fruit of action. So you have the knowledge, you know the difference. What do you think about that, Ashriel?
It makes me think of this like thing that's going on in the world where a lot of people are trying to find their dharmas, and there's like this notion of like quitting your corporate job if it means that you get to fulfill your dharma for 100% of the day. And yeah, that's what it makes me think of. And then also it kind of feels like there's a little less pressure to like have to renounce all pleasures to be able to fulfill on devotion and continue on this path. Like after you sharing that, it feels more of like a breath of fresh air of like, oh, it's okay for me to enjoy some of the things that I do just because I do. That may be different from like what you enjoy, but and I guess I'm trying to like relate it back to that dharma in a sense, like, we're all going to have a unique and different path.
Yeah. Think of you, I don't know, if you had animals and they became on the path of bhakti, and you had a bear, a grizzly bear, become a yogi. Does that mean now that they act like a bunny? Because no, they're still a grizzly bear. They're huge, they're furry, they want to, they've got claws. Their nature is who they are, right? So,
Yeah, wow.
and so we have a nature, literally the verse before, let's just take those two verses and put the context together. Krishna says in the previous verse, the modes of material nature, that means the energy that built us, built and ran this body, the construction of it is doing everything. It's running our senses and our interests and our desires and our motivation and what we do and what we don't do. It's running the show. We think we're doing it. We're not doing it. That's the verse before. So if we're not doing nothing, then the next verse, Krishna says, the difference between a materialist and a spiritualist is the knowledge that material nature is doing everything and that I'm not. It doesn't now stop material nature from doing everything. You just have the knowledge that you're not doing it. That's all. The whole Gita is particularly set that Krishna talks about the knowledge of it is the essence of it. In chapter 9, Krishna says, after many, many births of this mentality of I'm the doer, I'm the doer, I'm the doer, eventually you come to a point with knowledge. Krishna calls that person Jnanavan, or a forest, like a vana of knowledge. And that person who's developed spiritual knowledge, they think Vasudeva Sarvam Iti, that Vasudeva is doing everything, not me. I'm not doing anything. Vasudeva is doing it. That person is very rare. Why? Because that's the end of their births in this material world. That's it. It doesn't say anything there about stopping the senses and living in the Himalayas and drinking water only and eating leaves. It simply says, knowing that the senses and the world of the senses is being run by material nature and that Krishna is separate, that alone, that knowledge frees you from material life. So Azrael be Azrael, Rebecca be Rebecca, Dharma be Dharma, Jagai be Jagai, but develop the knowledge of knowing that this show, this theater is not real. It's temporary. I mean, it is real, but it's temporary. And the supreme is the one that we want to give our energies to. Make sense? What's your thoughts about that, Azrael?
Somewhat of a relief.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Why?
as we're
Because you
going
think you
about
have to
this.
change, right?
Yeah, like just less pressure to like have to do it right.
Yeah.
Or, renounce all things that aren't, or that are of this material world. Yeah, I mean, I've like for some reason when I first read this, I felt like there was this like sense of like selfishness, of like, don't do the things out of selfishness. And like that word came up just going through this chapter. So this is definitely expanding my perspective and understanding of karma. And I really like that the goal is specifically to give everyone the opportunity to find, to have this knowledge and to be spiritual, I suppose, rather than like, you have to be X, Y, Z, or else you are exiled and you're not accepted. And so that feels good.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's a common idea that this path is like a religion, that there's like, you've got to like get yourself to a certain thing. Otherwise you're just like falling. But that's not the case. Make sense?
Yeah.
What do you think, Rebecca?
I only got to hear like half of the discussion because one of my neighbors started asking me for something and started just talking a lot to me. So I'm sorry, but all I know is that, yeah, that's still something that I struggle with a bit. The whole like how much renunciation or how renounced should I be to, really be practicing bhakti or to really, be Krishna conscious. And I really like, what Dharma was saying is just being your best, trying to be your best self in a way. I think that comes hand in hand when with the philosophy and everything, especially when you feel like, at least with me, I feel very like guilty in the beginning too. I feel very like you said, selfish, it's like, oh, I'm not doing this. Like I'm expecting a result. And I still feel that sometimes, but I think those feelings of guilt and everything, I'm trying to understand also where they truly are coming from. Sometimes I'm like, I wonder if it's from my childhood. I wonder if it's like all these other things that I'm projecting and being triggered by these words, And sometimes I think about when I read Prabhupada's purports, I I feel like he it's such nectar in a way where it makes you dive deeper, like in the beginning you get confused and you feel all these emotions, but then if you give it time, and like Rukmini said, if you let it, put it on a shelf and you really give your time and reflect on it more, you can find out where is this really stemming from, these feelings, and embrace them. That's what I'm trying to do, is like embrace my emotions. And if I feel guilty or ashamed, and if I have questions, asking someone, like asking a mentor, asking a teacher, asking for help. That's what, and for me, it's like, I like to say, I don't know. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this is saying, but I do want to ask, because if not, I'm going to have this like concepts or thoughts in my head, and I may get more and more confused as time goes by. So yeah, I totally get it. The whole the that's something I actually want to talk about sometime in the future in the class. Like, yeah, how do we deal with those feelings of like guilt when we don't feel like, when we feel selfish or something like that? Because I feel that still, and I live in the temple, it's like I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I feel like I could be doing more, or kind of thing. That's what I'm trying to understand too.
Wait, baking tray or aluminum foil
Sorry,
on the
I
center
don't know if
of
you
the
can hear my
rack?
son in the background. Hey, give me 1 second, bud. I was listening to what you were saying. I just wanted to pop in really quick. When it comes to personal conflict, I just am reminded of Rukmini last week or the week before, and her approach on personal, like radical personalism. And I think it's hard in the world that we live in of spirituality, where everyone wants to kind of walk around and say, you're responsible for the way that you feel. It's not my responsibility, and you have expectations, and that's not spiritual, so you shouldn't have them. When you come into a tradition, it's all about service and devotion. I think all that goes out the window. I mean, there is a degree of self-reflection and making sure that our expectations are reasonable, right? If our expectation is, I just want to be treated with respect, that's a reasonable expectation. And if we're walking the path of devotion, we're choosing to walk the path of bhakti, then we're saying that we want to live a life of service. So we should be paying attention when people that we care about are saying, hey, that, this thing didn't feel good, or when you said that thing, and this notion of like, you need to go work it out within yourself. I'm not responsible for how you feel, I think is a bunch of bullshit, honestly, because we are all interacting with each other. And that's something that I have really enjoyed about yoga, is that we do take self-accountability, because we need to be aware of how we impact others. And it doesn't mean that we put ourselves behind and we only acquiesce to what others want, because it should be within reason, right? Within reason. If you're having silly material expectations of your boyfriend and he's not taking you out on the dates that you want to go on, and he doesn't make enough amount of money, like that's a different scenario, right? But when we're talking about our values and the way we enact those values with one another, it does get hard to have those conversations with people, because they often will use text and scriptures to uphold a notion that leaves them not having to look at their part, right? We each have a part, that we're playing, and it's never one-sided, especially when you choose the path of bhakti and the path of service. And so it's really hard, because I think in order to have progress in a conversation around conflict, both parties have to share those values, or share a set of values. Otherwise, if your values are really different, then it'll make it hard to come to a place of repair around that conflict. And I don't think that that's not spiritual. Like, if you're just saying, I have a boundary and it's not being respected, and you know, it's tricky, because this idea of service is so much about not putting yourself in the center, but that doesn't mean that you allow yourself to be treated while you're not putting yourself at the center, right? It's, for me, the phrase like within reason, that's been really helpful for me. Like, within reason, I'm okay with people having expectations of me, because we're all human. But if that expectation is unreasonable, then there's nothing I can do about that. But if it's within reason, even if I'm like, someone is like complaining that I'm not treating them a certain way, if it's within reason, my service is to honor that and go, okay, I hear you, and I'm going to look at myself, and I'm going to do my best to like refine and be more aware. Like, I acknowledge that that's your experience, so I'm gonna have a look at that, right? That's within reason. But if somebody is just unhappy with me because I don't share the same values, and so I don't make choices the way they would want me to make choices, that's not within reason. And so, you know, it becomes a different path at that point. But I really appreciated Rukmini talking about radical personalism, because I think sort of along the lines of, we all seek justice for those who have wronged us, and we want mercy for ourselves. And we should be having mercy on others and holding justice with ourselves. And that mercy with others doesn't mean that we just give people a pass to treat us however they want to treat us. But when we step back, there's sort of this weird flip-flop that we're still going through, and specifically in the spiritual community, I have seen, where people are misapprehending, misappropriating, and using spiritual language to bypass any sense of self-accountability for their contribution, whether they agree or disagree, from someone else's perspective. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Okay.
I have a story that, just a paragraph I want to read. Is that okay?
Yeah.
To add to this. So when Krishna, after the Bhagavad Gita and after the battle, he goes back to Dwarka, and everybody loves Krishna and Dwarka. Obviously, he's very cool. And when he comes into the city of Dwarka, everybody comes running outside to see him, basically. Now listen to this verse. I'll read the verse, I'll read one paragraph of the purport. At that time, so this is in the city of Dwarka, Krishna's coming, it's Krishna's city. Many hundreds of well-known prostitutes, now this is Bhagavatam, I'm reading directly the verse. At that time, many hundreds of well-known prostitutes began to proceed on various vehicles. They were all very eager to meet the Lord, and their beautiful faces were decorated with dazzling earrings, which enhanced the beauty of their foreheads. You think, what? There's prostitutes, like hundreds of them in Dwarka, and they're all like devotees? Yes. Now listen to this first paragraph. Prabhupada says, we may not hate even the prostitutes if they are devotees of the Lord. Even to date, there are many prostitutes in great cities of India who are sincere devotees of the Lord. By trick of chance, one may be obliged to adopt a profession which is not very adorable in society, but that doesn't hamper one in executing devotional service to the Lord. Devotional service to the Lord is uncheckable in all circumstances. Okay? Does that make sense? Is that a shocker? So we're not even talking about your little subtle problems with yourself. This is legit prostitutes engaged in sex for pay. And they are devotees of Krishna engaged in bhakti. So Krishna doesn't go, get away from me when they come out. Nasty prostitutes. He doesn't say that. He accepts them as his wonderful, loving, beautiful devotees. So your issues are yours. What Krishna wants is your love and devotion, whatever situation you're in. That's all. That makes sense? Yeah. There's more stories like that, but that one, I read that some time ago, last month or something. I thought, wow, what an amazing thing. Okay, who's next? Okay, you're next. Did you read, Ashriel? No. Yes, but Rebecca didn't read. Okay, you're on 29.
Bewildered by the modes of material nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities and become attached, but the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge.
Why are those duties inferior, Ashriel?
I'm reading it again.
Okay. Question, why are the duties inferior?
Because they are attached. They're attached to the material activities.
It says, go ahead.
But they're ignorant, so they don't know.
You subtly answered it, but Krishna says, you want to answer it, Rebecca?
No, I will let you answer it.
Okay. So the question is, why are the duties inferior? And the last sentence says, but the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge. So if the performer had knowledge, then the duties would not be inferior. So what makes the difference between duties that are inferior and duties that are superior?
The lack of knowledge.
Yes, knowledge.
And the knowledge is of the absolute truth.
Yes.
And the absolute truth is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Yes, and that everything is happening by material nature. That's all. Like I was working a project that I got fired on yesterday, and I only worked there one day. The boss was kind of a jerk, and he said to me, I said, oh, your business is going pretty good. He goes, yeah, I just bought a brand new Porsche with cash. And I thought, you think that you're the doer, but ahankara vimud atma, Krishna says that you're a fool, because you didn't do anything. And your little Porsche is not that cool anyways.
And then he fired you.
And then he fired me. Yeah. Why did he fire me? A lack of knowledge. Yeah. Okay. So what's the difference between superior duties and inferior duties? Ashriya.
Having the knowledge
Of?
of material nature running the show and not the person or the ego or the I.
Good. You want to add to that, Rebecca? No?
That was really great answer. But I guess, yeah, the difference between superior and inferior is the superior is when you know that it's coming from Krishna, everything is being done by Krishna. And when you are doing it for Krishna, that's when you're able to get out of these modes of nature. Whereas when it's inferior, you know that it's coming from the modes of nature. And again, either you think you're the doer, you think you're the controller, and you are attached to your results, which will keep you in this cycle of karma, which it could be a karma or karma. So it could be both.
Okay, so let's ask a question. I want to clarify some subtleties there. So let's say I'm a great devotee, I'm chanting my japa, and I'm just fully absorbed with Krishna, and I'm living in this house. And I'm around, every one of my neighbors is an ignorant materialist. And they drop a nuclear bomb in my backyard. Okay. Do I die? I do. If I was a materialist, would I die more? No. So who's actually running the show at that level? The modes of material nature. Krishna runs the overall show, but everything is happening by the modes of material nature. Does that make sense? We don't say, or Krishna doesn't say that he does every little thing, because then you get into complicated questions like, I don't know, why did Krishna kill my cat? So, like Krishna doesn't.
Which are a lot of questions asked in many different philosophies and religions. That is a question that's often asked.
Yes. And
Well,
the answer is,
then is God present when there is murder and rape and things of, that is.
yeah, the answer is no. And that's confusing for people because we're very attached to the world we live in and the body that we live in and the experiences that we have and all the things that we're attached to. We're assuming God's attached to those too. But Krishna makes it super clear throughout the Bhagavad Gita that this body is a machine made of material things being run by the modes of material nature. And we are passengers at best, witnessing the experiences that are happening to us, good and bad. And so we are not being puppeted by Krishna. Krishna's not doing each thing. The material nature is. Indirectly, Krishna is, because everything comes from Krishna. But directly, it's the modes of material nature. That's all there is to it. And it's a hard truth to swallow. But this body and this life and all the things that we're attached to, they're temporary. They will come and go. As Krishna says to Arjuna, asochan anvasochastvam, you're lamenting what you shouldn't lament. The wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. What does that supposed to mean? That this world is a ride at Disneyland. And we're in it and we're buckled and we go through it and you can't get off until it's over. And that's that. It's not that Walt Disney is moving all the puppets for us. It's just locked in place. So you, Azrael, as you are, you're moved by the modes of nature that you're born under, your desires, your personality, that your wants, your lust, your aversion is all baked into this body at birth. And you have the smallest free will to develop knowledge And then as you witness this ride, you can perceive it in a different way. That's all.
That was a really good explanation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was
so
nice.
you, Rebecca, is a 25-year-old in a female body with all the desires that a 25-year-old female has. You can't, by chanting a lot, change your body. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Your body's baked in.
Like a cupcake.
Yeah, fully. You're a cupcake.
And then there's a desire of wanting a cupcake. You know,
Yeah,
it's the
you're a
mind.
cupcake
It's
and
the
you desire it.
desire.
And so the key here is when we read the verse, Krishna clearly says the difference between a cupcake that's a materialist and a cupcake that's not is the knowledge of it. But that knowledge does not change at all the nature of the cupcake. It just makes it that the experience of it, the heart of it, is in a different place, and that's it. So we have to be careful when we say Krishna's the doer. Krishna is, but indirectly Krishna's the doer. Everything's happening by the modes. Does that make sense, Azrael? You are Azrael. You will never be Jagai. But in the next life, I may be Azrael and you may be Jagai. How is that possible? Because of the body that we take birth in and the modes that affect the body. But in the body, I will never be Azrael, no matter how much I chant or freak out. It won't happen.
I have a question then, Jagai. So
Yeah.
pretty much then when we're preaching or when we're teaching and saying, okay, so if you practice, you know, Krishna consciousness, you get out of this repeated life of birth and death. That just means when we die, you know, when literally this body is now gone. It's not like, you know,
Well, there's two parts to it. Yes. So think of putting, I don't know, a 5-year-old child on a roller coaster. Or like when I was a kid, I went to Disneyland and I went into the Haunted Mansion. Have you ever been on that ride to the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland? I was like 6. I was freaking 100% terrified. 100%. Nothing was more terrifying than that thing. I couldn't believe it. I was totally, completely in anxiety over going through that ride. Lately, I went on it last year and I couldn't believe how badly that ride sucked. It was the dumbest ride I ever went on. It was so dumb. I thought, this scared me. I'm so bored. I'm the same person. What is the difference? Same ride, same person. What's the difference?
your experience.
Okay, so when we say we can get freed from anxiety and suffering in this world, it doesn't mean that our body changes and now nuclear bombs don't blow up in our face. It means that the suffering that we go through is in a different mindset. And then when we leave this body, then we leave this material world into a different place that you can accept a body with that mindset. Does that make sense?
Yeah, from the mindset, then that's when we go into the new body or Vaikuntha or a higher planet.
Yes,
Okay.
because we have a mindset detached from this world. Like if you, I don't know if you've been to the gym and ever worked out too hard and come home and you were totally like sore, right? You're all sore, tired. But internally, you feel good. Oh, I went to the gym. I feel good. I got a good workout. What if you had the same exact experience, but your doctor told you you had cancer? The pain is the same, but the mindset is now entirely different. One is like, oh my God, I'm suffering. I'm dying. This is horrible. I'm freaking out, having panic attacks. The other one's like, I'm the same suffering. Oh, I'm I'm getting fit. I feel good. So the suffering's the same, but the mindset is different. What if I went through the pain of childbirth without a child? I would freak out. Where women do it all the time, and their mindset is to get a child. So the suffering is there, but the mindset makes it different. What do you think about that, Azriel?
I'm kind of just taking it all in and like, yeah, I mean, mindset is huge. Your perspective on something is everything. It's your experience, and having certain knowledge about certain things, having the knowledge changes the way that you perceive different things, certain things, experiences. And so I guess coming back to this verse, having the knowledge is what allows you to not be attached.
What about suffering?
I mean, something that somebody else suffers may be, like, for example, I am no longer nannying because it is very, very challenging. And I'm in this, and parents are really kind and understanding, and I'm literally part of their family, but they made it clear that they chose to have children. So my experience and their experience is very different. It's both suffering, but, well, I don't know if this was that great of an example, but another example could be like, my sister is going through a hard time, and I've gone through a similar hard time, and like both of our perspectives on it are completely different. So she's suffering something that wouldn't make me suffer because of our perspective on it. So two people can have the exact same experience. You can go on a ride with your son who's, obviously not 5 anymore, but he can have a miserable time and you are bored.
Yeah. Very good. Excellent. Perfect answer. It reminded me of this thing I saw where there was these twins. One of them was a total drunk. He was pretty much homeless. And the other one was a judge, a high judge. And they asked them, like, what happened? Why are you a drunk in the street? And that one said, because my father was an alcoholic. And then they asked the one that became a judge, why are you a judge? And he said, because my father was an alcoholic. So they both took the same scenario in completely different ways with a different mindset. So back to the answer, that question that Rebecca was saying, we do say that by taking up Krishna consciousness, you freed from suffering in this lifetime and the next, but it doesn't mean you're freed from the experience of pain. It doesn't mean your checking account is full of money automatically.
Or that you're just like, every day is the best day ever all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
I like the way this dialogue is going, and it made me think about, I think it's a Buddhist saying, you can either suffer miserably or you can suffer well. Yeah. And so your analogy of the gym, like, people going to the gym and just like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain, is, their mindset is one way. As opposed to the person who's going to the gym and is like, yeah, that was hard. But, it makes me think of Zig Ziglar. I think it was Zig Ziglar or Stephen Covey. He used to say, you have to enjoy the price you pay. Yeah. And so that's what allows us to go through the physical suffering. that is unavoidable because of the human experience, but how we mentally are going through it is, I think, again, for those who are in knowledge, for those who have the knowledge, for those who have, these truths, we know better. And so we know, like, it's like the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, these kinds of things. Like, I'm so fixed in my mindset here, it'll always be a struggle. I'll never get better. This is pointless. This is so much work. And all, like, going with the gym analogy, as opposed to the person who goes with the growth mindset of like, this is difficult, but I can get through it, and I can grow, and I can change, and things can get better. And so we just take that sort of material approach to it. We can add that spiritual approach of, I'm suffering, but I'm suffering well. Like, there's a purpose to my suffering, and I emphasize my focus and my awareness on that, and not so much on just the other aspect of always being in suffering and in that space of the stuck mentality kind of thing, So we can suffer well, or we can suffer miserably, but this is another one too that I think that we misapprehend as spiritualists, is that we think like, but I'm suffering, like this hurts so much, right? This doesn't feel good. If this was a good thing, I should be feeling good, but it's not always the case. Sometimes we have to go through difficulties to get to the real goodness, the goodness that has longevity, and not the immediate, it feels good thing. So I've always kept that one. You can suffer miserably, or you can suffer well, but none of us can escape suffering. It doesn't mean that all life has to be one big long suffering. There are moments of joy, moments of beauty, and moments of grace and mercy and magic. But the notion of this, like, getting rid of our suffering, it isn't that we actually don't suffer. It's unhooking us from the entanglement that we have when we are going through the suffering.
100%.
Yeah, it's part of the human experience, exactly. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, like the victim mentality, exactly. Yeah, something like this. Yeah, great. Sorry it was so noisy here. My kids are eating lunch.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Shall we just close up with final thoughts, or like maybe just one positive takeaway from this conversation today that you've had?
I think one positive takeaway, I really liked the way you brought up Dharma, like personal relationships, especially in a spiritual community. The fact of the in reach, I think that's something I've been practicing a lot, the in reach, like not quickly telling people, hey, you shouldn't really have any expectations. Hey, you shouldn't really be attached. I think I'm very big on letting people be like, hey, this is how you're feeling, and I want to provide space for you, especially as a human being, and I care. But at the same time, I have to say, if that's also in reach for me, like in my how am I feeling? Am I ready also to be, even providing space? What are my boundaries? Especially, when we're doing selfless service. And again, like I was saying, in my mind, how much responsibility am I taking for myself, even for me? And is that being in reach with myself too?
Yeah.
Because I don't like to bring up the Capricorn thing in astrology, but yeah, as Capricorns, we tend to be very hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
We judge ourselves the most. We put ourselves on a very high standards, and that creates suffering and pain for us. And so that's where I am trying to obviously have discipline and have accountability, responsibility, but also be in like also be also soft on myself and have compassion. So I really enjoyed that. And another positive takeaway is having these kind of talks with you all, and how much I miss and appreciate you guys, both Jagai and Dharma and Israel, because you guys both, I was talking about you guys yesterday, you guys really are my mentors, and You guys really inspire me to be who I am. And you guys, checking in on me, and Dharma, I feel the love from you, and I always am supporting you. And yeah, and obviously Israel, your excitement is what keeps us all going too, wanting to know more. And so that's also a positive takeaway, just having this all the time. And I really appreciate you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the kind words, and I love you so much. And I just still feel really bad that we didn't get together before you left. And I'm worried that you have perceived that to mean anything other than I'm just really busy. So I love you and I miss you and I think about you often. And I do look forward to being able to just sit down and connect with you one-on-one soon.
Yeah, I'll be going back to LA in June-ish 7th for a bit, because Jaramita Swami is coming to LA. And so that's kind of going to be huge in a way, because we'll see how it goes. So maybe we can now plan something. I'm giving you a month and a half in advance for your Vata self. So I'm gonna so I'll make sure that we could all see each other. And yeah, so thank you. And don't worry, Dharma, I totally understand.
Thank you. Asriel, what's one takeaway that you feel has really benefited you here today?
So beautifully said, Rebecca. I really resonate with what you shared as well. Having this discussion really helped to allow me to give myself grace through this process, because, as we start unpacking these verses, one can easily, think of like, oh, well, man, I don't do that, or I'm not perfect yet, or, I haven't reached this point. So it feels really good to hear both of your stories and experiences, and also just know that, like, just by being here, it's something, and it's worth something. So yeah, and I really, 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 sometimes I feel like the things I share is like, what the heck is the point of even sharing this? I have no life experience on this path. Like, so I feel a little bit under pressure when Jagai, you're like, what are your thoughts, Azrael? I'm like, I don't know. That's why I'm here. So, I wanted to share that I appreciate your patience and all of your not feedback, but contributions to the conversation, because I really feel like here I'm just kind of like becoming a sponge. So thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you for your courage.
I have one verse to read, and that's all for me.
Okay.
Kunti, so Krishna's leaving to go back to Dwarka, and Bhagavad Gita is over, war is over, and Kunti, the mother of the Pandavas, so much trouble had happened to them. Oh my God, it's not even worth going through it all. But so much trouble had gone up to this point. She stops Krishna on the way out, stops the chariot, and says to him many beautiful prayers. And one of them is, "Oh Krishna, I wish that all those calamities would happen again and again, so that we could see you again and again. For seeing you means that we will no longer see repeated birth and death." So Kunti was praying for calamities, because when they come, then she just internalizes and thinks about Krishna. That's a level.
I'm always so inspired by Queen Kunti, but it's also like such an unattainable level for me, like to be at that place where I'm like praying for hardships so that, it brings me closer. I'm over here praying to not have hardships so that I can get closer.
Yeah. I pray, "Oh Krishna, give me millions of dollars and then I'll be closer to you. I promise." Promise.
Yeah, so funny. But I think it gives us good perspective we don't have to be like Queen Kunti. She's such an elevated spiritual position and perspective that she does that. But I think our takeaway from that can be an understanding that there is purpose for us going through our struggles. No matter who is contributing to the conflict and the struggle, whether it's you or the other people, it's all happening so that we can get closer to Krishna. And so we can even take our problems and spiritualize those as well. Yeah. Beautiful class today. I feel like a lot of us got some good medicine for our hearts. So thank you all for your presence and for your insights and your willingness to share your thoughts that you're just coming up with as we're throwing this stuff at you. It's great. It's so good to have all perspectives. And really that's what we aim to do. I know Jagai and I really strive to create an environment where all perspectives can be shared and respected. There's no judgment here. It's just really encouragement. And so we appreciate your courage and your vulnerability in sharing about these things that can be really personal. So thank you. Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha
Patitam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Sadhu Sangha ki jai, Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gauda Premanandi, Hari Hari.
All right, we will be having Kirtan on Friday. I know there's been some confusion with our email that went out and our event page. Hopefully, I think that's all updated, but this Friday, 7 p.m., we are going to try to live stream, Rebecca. So if you're around and you want to live stream, it'll be on Instagram usually. To figure it out. I got to figure out a situation because I want it to be good quality, and I want those of us playing to be comfortable. And I know Jagai sometimes doesn't like it, the screen right there blocking people's view. So I'm mindful. I want to be mindful of all those things.
He gets shy.
Serve everybody. I know it's like right.
It's weird.
But you do it in front of other people over there. We're trying to figure it out.
Because he's TikTok famous. Yeah.
We'll figure it out. But either way, we'd love to see you and share in space and time with you. And don't forget, if you just want more kirtan, every other Wednesday, the first and third Wednesdays, we have Shri and Joaquin, some really good devotee friends of mine that are in Australia right now, and they are top-notch kirtan wallas. And Shri studies classical Indian music, classical Indian dance. She's been a devotee for a long time, so you get a lot of stories. And she teaches all the different ragas, like the melodies, and the mood of the melodies. And so you start to have a sort of deeper connection with the mantras, the melodies that they're playing, and the mood that is behind them. And it's really beautiful. So that's every other Wednesday. If you're interested, check them out. Okay. We'll see you Friday, Jagai. If you want to bring muffins or cookies, please do.
Friday means tomorrow.
Yeah. Yes. Tomorrow. Okay. I just got a bunch of plates and silverware and stuff for the studio. So that means is that very soon here, we will hopefully be able to serve dinners again like we used to. That's my plan. But for now, if you want to bring cookies and muffins, that would be great.
Okay, I will.
Only if you're up for it. Okay.
I'll bring them.
All right. Okay. See you all later. Haribol.
Well.